content warning. The following interview is explicit, so if you have any children listening, make sure they cover their ears or sit this one out. You've been warned.
Welcome, Japan.
Welcome to another edition of Why Come Japan. I'm your host, Mr. Radri, where I interview creatives about their craft and how it relates to Japan. And today on my show is Mr. Rayme Michaels, or third time on my show, Mr. Rayme Michaels. So the reason why you're here today is you wrote a new book. I've been calling Orange is the New Black, but that's not the title of it. It's called The Spirals of Orange and Black.
Oh yeah, no, that title you just said, Orange is the New Black, I only heard of that show long after I came up with the title of this book. You know, I was like, I'm gonna call it, and then I saw this show on Netflix, like I think weeks or maybe 2 or 3 months after I came up with the title of the book. I think it was at least 3 months after I came up with the title. I was like, what is this? That show's title sounds a lot like this book that I'm writing right now, and this is really weird. But guess what? For the past couple of weeks, I've been hooked on that show. I've been watching like so many episodes every day, and now I'm on season 3.
Huh. Okay. So does it make you want to change the book at all after seeing that show?
No. Why would it make me want to change it? It's a different title. This is it. Spirals of Orange and Black.
Okay.
Why would I change the title? I mean, they're not obviously the same title. They're just similar.
Right. Well, when I was reading this book, I kind of got this impression that it was almost like, you know how sometimes music artists, they make like concept albums? You know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, this seems kind of like a concept book. Like, there seems to be a lot of the stories you can kind of relate to the color orange. Am I right about this?
There's a little bit of a theme, as you saw, of orange. There's a slight tint. The orange and black are fit, I believe, the tonality of the book, as my editor, Chris Carlier, also felt. And they and the theme of orange, it exists. It kind of permeates, some of them, and it's kind of, mentioned. It actually comes out or comes about overtly in some of them. So definitely there is a little bit of an orange theme that's in it. But the spirals of orange and black is how I see life. A tonality of ups and downs. A lighter side and a darker side. It's pretty much almost like a metaphor, or is symbolic of life itself, and of course the stories in the book, 11 of which are true, 9 of those 11 being about me, and even one of the fiction ones, Walking Dead Weight, that takes place in Japan. That one is semi-autobiographical, even though it's presented as fiction, and as I told you in the last interview, I'd write, I was gonna write, like, my next book would be a book of short stories, and one of the stories would take place in Japan, and I did that, and I said I'd write at least one. I think I said that takes place in Toronto, and it's a lot more than one that does take place in Toronto.
You've written a couple of books. Like the first one you wrote was, I can't even pronounce the title sometimes. What's it? Incorrigibility? What?
Yeah, I wrote more than a couple books. This is my 6th book, but as I said, it's my first one of short stories. The other 5 are novels and novellas. That first book of mine is entitled Incorrigibility, and it's a novella, yes.
Okay, and that started off as you say in your Orange and the Spiral of the Black. I'm sorry.
Spirals of Orange and Black.
Spirals Orange and Black, thank you. As you say in that your book, that was originally, you wanted to make movies and you wanted to write screenplays, but eventually you just ended up turning that story into a novella.
Yes, I think I talked about this, I believe, in the last interview we did.
You did.
April of last year. I wrote 3 screenplays. That was my 3rd one, and then I pigeonholed it, and years later, in December of 2011, I decided, you know what, I can turn that screenplay into a short novel, and that's what I did. I changed the formatting, I edited it, took out some stuff, added some stuff, and it became that.
I was going to ask you, are you familiar with the filmmaker Russ Meyer?
No.
No? Okay, well, because when I was reading Even on Mars, I don't know, I probably should have said this during the interview we did last time. I remember thinking, this is like, it's almost like porn. This isn't written like it was porn, right?
No. There's one sex scene. There's one sex scene in the book.
Even on, there's many sex scenes in Even on Mars. There's more than just one in Even on Mars.
No, there's lots of sex humor, but there's only one sex scene. It's between Mandy and Don Power. There is a sex scene, yes. The other scene that's over the top, that one, okay, it involved between Lillian Rumsfeld and Ragnar Rumsfeld, her husband, where she's strangling him with her long tongue while he fingers her like crazy, and she's slapping him, saying faster and harder and faster like crazy. I mean, I wouldn't consider that like porn. I mean, that's like crazy, like over top. There's nothing like really erotic about that. It's not erotic, right? The scene between Mandy and Don Power, that's erotic. That I would call like you can find scenes like that in romance novels, and more than just one, like quite a few. I mean, I think I mentioned this to you before. I was reading quite a few romance novels the summer I turned 19, and they did have an effect on me. And you can really see it in Red Love.
Yeah.
But you see it also in that scene between Don Power and Mandy. But it's to generalize that book, which is full of murder and mayhem, as written as porn. I mean, no, but there's a lot of sex humor. Obviously, there's tons of sex humor. Like there's the Maraski that Clive was dating, that he's complaining about, Shanti, who has the vagina at the back of her head, and there's not, you don't see any scene, but we know why it's there and what happens. I don't want to give away too much, but I mean the reason you're remembering it in that way is because obviously it's filled with tons of lascivious, licentious kind of humor, but I'd say there's only one real sex scene in that thing.
Okay. Well, I remember I liked it. I mean, I'm not saying this in a derogatory sense. I'm just saying.
No, I know. Obviously, I understand. You're just telling me the way you remembered it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because like a lot of the books that you write and a lot of the stories you create, there seems to be a lot of emphasis on like sex in these books, like more so than like what I'm used to reading about.
Yeah, definitely. That is overt. That I mean, it's in the blurbs on the backs of the books. Well, I mean, some of them anyway. It's not something I'm bashful about or I'm trying to hide. I mean, obviously, I have a prurient mind. I always have.
Right. Is there a reason why you like writing about this topic so much?
It just fascinates me. I mean, I'm sex obsessed. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's fun. It can be really entertaining. It can be entertaining in the sense of where it feels good to watch or think about or hear people talk about it. And it also can be very funny.
Right.
It can be like you can end up in a ludicrous situation, and like even in real life, not just in fictional books or fictional stories and movies. Even in real life, you can end up in a hilarious situation because of it. It's I mean, there isn't much more anything really like much more entertaining than sex. That sex sells. I mean, that statement, sex sells, has been around since long before you and I were even born. I mean, it's just a fact. Sex sells, and there's a reason for it.
Right.
I mean, it's very entertaining, very interesting, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're biologically hardwired to be preoccupied with it on some level. Otherwise, there wouldn't be over 7 billion people in the world. Now, not everyone. I mean, I think like 10% of the population are asexual, and the very idea of sex disgusts them. But I mean, that's a minority of people.
Right. You don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, of course, because I mean this is your show and you're the guest. But you kind of come from a huge background. You were a Catholic. You went to like a Catholic school. Can you talk about this?
I went to Catholic school in not for long. It was in senior kindergarten, grade 1 and 2, and I left at the very beginning of grade 3. To go to a public school, and then I remained in the public sector. But I was raised Catholic, yeah.
Okay, but
I mean, obviously, as you know, I'm not. I mean, as it says, as I explained in one of the stories that the one you reread, that how I eventually became an atheist, and how I started doubting when I was 17, doubting the very existence of God, not just the validity of the Bible itself. And then I became an atheist when I was 24. But anyway. Yeah.
What made you want to make the conversion to atheism?
Well, I mean,
if you don't want to talk about this, you can. I know you might be a little sensitive to this.
No, I'm not sensitive about it. I wrote a whole story about it, which you read 2 times. Reborn on a fungal October afternoon, which is about midpoint through the book. But no, as I said, I started doubting when I was 17, and 6.5 years later, at the age of 24, and that doubt culminated into realizing basically that hell and the devil are just fear tactics, and I shouldn't feel guilty about my doubt. I shouldn't feel guilty, about being a normal, human being who gets angry sometimes, swears sometimes, is preoccupied with sex and loves sex, and shouldn't feel guilty anymore every time I fucking jerk off, which is fucking awful. I mean, what's worse than feeling guilty every single time you beat your meat? Am I right? I mean, what's worse than that? I mean, that's how I used to be. I used to feel guilty every single time I spanked my monkey. It was awful.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Would you say that any of this, being repressed in the Catholic Church, would that contribute a lot to your writing?
No. I mean, I addressed the issue of religion and a little bit, and the hypocrisy of religion and the struggle between being carnal beings and being beings who want to believe in maybe an ascetic religion we were brought up into, and the struggle between those 2 things. I addressed it a bit in Incorrigibility, in the church scene of Incorrigibility, my first book, and in chapter 2 of Red Love, my 2 star-crossed vampire lovers, Paul and Dominic, crucify a priest to an altar and then have graphic erotic sex on it. That represents the inevitable triumph of carnality over Christianity. And religion is addressed a bit in Screw the Devil's Daiquiri. And I mean, even on Mars, there's that one satirical scene of the street preacher who's still trying to convince people in the 23rd century on Mars that Christ will come again, and Christ spoke to him, and he's going to judge the people of Mars first, and then he's going to go down to Earth, and so it does come out. I mean, in my books, a bit. My favorite philosopher is Friedrich Nietzsche. I talked about that a bit in the book, and my master's major research project was on him. And what attracted me to him so much when I was 24 was his heavy criticism and critique of Christianity, and I mean, in the Chaos Cafe, there's I don't know, there isn't so much of the necessarily, I mean, a religious critique per se, but obviously there is the element of sexuality and sex humor, especially in the classroom scenes, in Chris Conley's writing class. But I mean, you have to understand something, Radley. I've been preoccupied with sex since before I knew that in Christianity, sex outside of marriage and even fantasizing about sex were condemned. So I was obsessed. I've been thinking about sex since I was 5 years old, I think. Even though I don't think I figured out what intercourse was till I was 8. I was still thinking about sex from the age of 5. But I didn't find out till things about things being masturbation being a sin. So I think till I was 16. You know what I mean? So no, I mean, even if I was raised in an atheistic household and raised an atheist, whatever, never went to Catholic school, my writing would still be heavily, prurient. There'd be a lot of sexuality in it, carnality and red love. But what would be missing, however, is the so much religious critique. There may have been some, but there's a good chance there would have been none at all. You know what I mean? Because it's an inner conflict I had to deal with and work through. I think, and that's one of the things that led me to liking Nietzschean philosophy so much. And so that's what would have been, I believe, different. There still would have been tons of sex.
Okay.
Or at least sex humor and sex talk.
Right. Because it seems like a lot of your books kind of focus a lot on the subject.
Yeah, for example, in Screw the Devil's Daiquiri, John Hazel right? I mean, that book deals with narcissism, nihilism, but also hedonism and sexual addiction, right? I mean, it's a semi-autobiographical book, and there's good reason why I call it that, you know.
Right. Actually, here's something I wanted to ask you. Give me like paint me a picture of like what kind of audience do you have for your book? Do you have like, are you part of a book club, or like what kind of people would you say read your books that like aren't people who like, or like me, quote unquote?
I think it's like people who really like shows like Californication and Weeds, and perhaps other fans like myself of Kevin Smith, like who love movies like Clerks and Mallrats and Dogma. And it's hard to really pinpoint the demographic, because women have also read my books and laughed and found it funny. I was surprised, when I'd hear about a woman reading Incorrigibility and finding it hilarious. You know what I mean? I was always expecting that, most women, in this day and age would hate Incorrigibility, for example. But it wasn't the case there. I mean, some like it, some don't, some love it, and they laugh a lot. It's hard to say. Okay, it leans towards men. I wouldn't necessarily say that about like all the books though. Like I wouldn't necessarily say that about Spirals of Orange and Black, my new book. And I don't think I'd say that about the Chaos Cafe. I wouldn't say that, but I probably like Red Love. It's hard to say as well. I think it leans about equally between men and women. I'd say books like Incorrigibility, Screw the Devil's Daiquiri, and Even on Mars are ones, due to the sexual content, probably lean towards men being the dominant readership rather than women. It's in terms of what kind of books they might like to read. I mean, it's spread across the board. It's hard to say, okay, this kind of reader would like this kind of book and this kind of book. I mean, fans of movies like Van Wilder and Old School, and also the writings of like Tucker Max, like I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell, might really like them as well. But it's hard to really pinpoint and pigeonhole an entire readership.
Right. No, I mean, usually like when people sell books, they always try to come up with some sort of like, if you like this, you'll like blah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they always, when you're, imagine like probably when you're a writer or I know when you're a filmmaker, you kind of have to put yourself in a box. You're like saying, what movie is your movie like? Kind of like packaging, quote unquote. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense.
So also one thing I'm kind of curious about is like, do you have like a community of like people who like, because usually like the way I'm doing this stuff online, I mean, I'm still kind of rather small. It's a small creation. I'm slowly building, getting bigger, but
sure.
You kind of have to grow your community, of people. I'm guessing probably your readership. Do you have like a strong community, like on Goodreads or like a book club or anything that like?
Well,
people who...
I am on Goodreads, and I am in some writing and reading groups on Facebook. Yes, you're right. It absolutely online presence is so important, and of course, so is social media as well. I have an author page on Facebook. I have my Twitter and all that. But that's that's about it. I mean, if regular regular fans all around the world that I know of, I'm not there yet.
Okay, I see. So that's kind of why you have to like do some promote your book in like places like this, like podcasts or through friends or something, correct?
Right, and like if I'm on vacation somewhere in the world, I can meet someone, tell them about my books, and they could become a reader. Like somebody I met in Australia, and we had a lot of things in common. He was into the same things. I told him about my books, and he started reading it. So that's an example of somebody living like somewhere far away who suddenly becomes interested in my writing and actually starts buying the books and reading them. But I mean, I don't have a huge following in that way. I mean, if I did, maybe I wouldn't have to teach anymore.
Right. Well, I mean, you have a publisher, right? This is through a publisher, or is this self-published? I mean, the most recent
No,
one.
no. The only book I have that's traditionally published is my third book, Through the Devil's Daiquiri, which was published through a small publishing house in Minnesota called Melange Books. My others were have been self-published.
Okay, because I know from based on what I've seen on the internet that it's much easier to get like nonfiction books published opposed to like fiction books. Can you speak a little bit about that, or you don't know too
More
much about the subject?
easier to get nonfiction books. Oh, okay. I can give you an example. Self-help books sell a lot, so that would be non example of nonfiction that has a huge niche market. So that would be an example of one. And there are, self-publishers who make a living just pumping out self-help books, either that they write or they get ghostwriters to write. In terms of the world of fiction, romance, horror romance, and especially at Christian romance, they're like at the top for like selling. Like they have a huge niche market. Surprisingly, Christian romance up like is usually like number one. I mean that stuff really sells.
I can see why it sells. It's like I'm a Christian and I like romance, so why not Christian romance?
Yeah. But in terms of like as a
Right.
whole, like getting traditionally published, getting traditionally published being easier with nonfiction than fiction. I'm not sure about that. I don't know.
All right. Okay. So what I'm gonna ask you is, I need to set this up because otherwise I don't want to make you a fan. And this isn't fucking Fox News where I'm trying to pigeonhole you into like some sort of like category or something. This is meant to be an innocuous question. But would you ever consider writing porn? I mean, like a porn story.
Nah.
Never. Never.
No. Why would I?
Like, okay,
No,
let me ask
no,
you this. Let me ask you this. Okay, do you like porn?
I mean, sometimes I do. I mean, I watch so much of it between age 13, almost 14 to 15 that I kind of like lost interest in it for many years because it leaves nothing to the imagination. And then I've watched a little bit of it, like like over the years now and then. But I mean, there's a difference. Just because I mean I like something doesn't necessarily mean I want to partake in it in some way. I mean. Plus, I mean, in Japan, there's a lot less need to watch porn because it's so much easier to get laid. But I mean, I mean, I can't imagine why I'd want to write a porn. I mean, the writing is so stupid and boring. A guy, he goes jogging, bumps into a girl, they say some stupid lines, and they go to one of their places and they have sex. Like, what's even to write? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, see, the reason why I ask this question is because a lot of the time, one of my favorite filmmakers, the guy I mentioned earlier, Russ Meyer, he made a movie called Super Vixens. And at that time, during the 1970s, this was considered to be porn. And if you watch it, it has a story. I mean, like, sure, there's lots of sex scenes, and there's lots of sexual innuendos throughout it. And, I mean, I loved the hell out of this movie. It's like I can watch it again and again. It's a cult film. There's murder, there's death, there's boobs, there's tons of stuff in it. And I love it. And, I mean, it's complete schlock. And it's like, I really wish they'd make more movies like this. Because, yeah, I agree. Porn in general, it can be very boring. Especially, like, if you have, like, a bad director attached to it where they focus on one image for, like, 30 minutes. You're like, show me something else. Give me a story. Give me something. I mean, like, I know most people are going to be, like, writing in the comments saying, you watch porn for story? Like, come on, man. I'm sure somebody does. It's like, okay, like, for example, romance novels, right? Romance novels have often been considered to be porn for women because it's often a lot of, like, it's like this erotic fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And so, you have, like, this huge erotic fantasy for women, and it gets them aroused, because, the way women get aroused. I mean, I'm not saying this to sound condescending. If I am, please eat me out in the comments or whatever.
It's different in romance novels. There's no money shot in romance novels. Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, you could probably metaphorically say there's a money shot. I mean, I don't know what that is, but if you know what it is, you can tell me.
What's a metaphorical money shot?
I mean, metaphorical, like, for example, you go through, I don't know, plot point A or plot point B, because, I mean, relatively, I'd like to say that the media probably sometimes likes to portray women as like people who are, you know, against the idea of like being sexualized, you know. And I feel like there's probably some, I mean, unless I get a tsunami of hate from this comment, I don't know.
No, I mean, there are women who love being sexualized and use their sexualization as a form of empowerment, especially if it's like a woman with like histrionic personality disorder, like Samantha in Sex and the City. So, but it depends on the woman. You know what I mean? I mean, it does depend. But romance novels do have a story, though. They have. There's tons of pornographic scenes that's called erotica and romance novels, but they don't have the that really like that vulgar male element. You know, that's like just like about hardcore pounding. You know, there's much more sensual in the romance novels, much more sensual than in the in porn movies. However, I agree, it's very much pornographic. If you've got a writer writing about exactly what a man's doing with a woman's clitoris, even if you don't call it a clit, even if you just call it a flower butt or whatever the fuck the writer's gonna call it, it's still pornography. You know what I mean? But obviously, I mean, when people watch porn, if there's this actual story and character development, then there has to be way less sex, which isn't why people are watching it, and that's it. It stops being porn in the first place.
Okay, so you're saying it's misclassified if there's a story.
Yeah, if there's an actual story, I mean, if there's a real story, like a solid story, like a meaty story that you find in an actual movie you'd see at just regular cinema, then yeah, I don't think it's gonna be very pornographic. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I mean, if there's one scene in it where there's sex and they're actually showing a close-up of a penis going inside a vagina, okay, that's a pornographic scene, you know what I mean? But it wouldn't. I don't think a movie like that would do well unless it was like an amazing story and really entertain people. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is people who want a story won't watch it because the story won't be good enough. People who want porn won't watch it because it's only going to be like one scene. It's not enough for them. You know what I mean? They want to. Yeah, it's not. It's unless they like they'll get so bored of just that one scene. You know, people. A lot of guys who watch porn like online, they keep changing, like keep going from one video to another, and one picture to another, one image to another, until they finally find the perfect one that they build up to have climax to. But that kind of shit causes erectile dysfunction. Because when a guy's like having sex with a woman, he can't just bang.
Okay.
He can't. He's not. The woman isn't changing in front of him. It's just one woman. You have to follow through from beginning to end. You know what I mean? So guys who do that shit, like they jerk off to porn and like switch from like image to image and video to video to video, those guys are fucking themselves over like in the long run when it comes to actual real sex. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them are.
Well, I think what the problem is that it kind of presents itself as kind of unrealistic, or like I think I think I read a book once. You're a fan of this author. I read Neil Strauss back when I was in Japan, and I was like doing terrible at dating girls, and he wrote a book called The Truth, and in that book he talks
I love
about
that book. Great book.
and in that book he talks about how the things about pornography is that the problem with it is that it kind of presents you with these unrealistic expectations, and it also kind of it'll never get angry at you, that sort of thing. It's like only one emotion, and that's just arousal, and I don't know if like what you're saying, like flipping from picture to picture will cause erectile dysfunction. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert at any of this.
I watched the video. The doctor was talking about that. It's not. He doesn't say it happens to all guys, but it does happen quite a bit to guys who do that. And not all of them, but some of them. Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, I guess the question here is, okay, so you consider a lot of, like, what women write in terms of this romance novel, you consider it erotica. Would you say you've written some of this, right? Or no? Would you say you've never written it?
As I told you, the romance novels I read the summer I turned 19 heavily influenced me, which is why you'll find a lot of erotica in Red Love, and you'll find it in Screw the Devil's Daiquiri, and you will find it in Even on Mars, and a little bit in The Chaos Cafe, as well. But and it's not just women who write romance novels. Men make a good living writing romance novels too, big time.
Okay. Would you describe any of your books as romance novels, or no?
No.
Or does that degrade them?
But Red Love is horror romance.
All right, then. So you can find all of Rayme's books in the links below. I'll attach them in this episode. Well, you can't see them right now if you're watching this live. You can go to Amazon.com, type in Rayme Michaels. It should be the first thing that pops up, right?
Yeah, when you type in Rayme Michaels, I know when you type in Rayme Michaels on an iPhone on Amazon, all 6 of my books come up. Not so much on my laptop. When I type my name, a whole bunch of things come up that have nothing to even do with books. I don't know why. But this is the new one we've been talking about, Spirals of Orange and Black, right here. And they'll put a link to my author page and a link to this book directly as well. You can get this and all my books on both paperback and in Kindle ebook form as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so if you stick around for more impromptu streams here on the Rad Culture channel here on Twitch, remember, all hail our culture, our rad culture. All right, yeah, so be sure to join the Discord if you want to see more, memes, grab ya girls, or updates on the Why Come Japan show. Be sure to check the Discord. Join the Discord. It's a lot of fun if you like hanging out and posting images. And if you want to know more about the streams or updates, yeah, that's where you should go. So until then, I'm Radri and
Rayme Michaels. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching.
And hey, Rayme.
Yeah?
Jesus, man.